Welcome everyone. Today we have Nellie rejoining us. How are you today, Nellie?
Oh, good. Thanks, Gabby. Thank you for having me on.
You are so welcome. So we're up to interview 7 with Nellie. And if you haven't seen those, Nellie is a survivor of generational abuse, of SRA and of MK Ultra. And she's been bravely speaking out, going through the programming and really just unpacking the tools that have been used in these MK Ultra programs year upon year upon year through her life. And it's been incredibly insightful. And I know survivors are getting so much out of just understanding the deeper layers of the techniques they're using, the color programming, just different ways that they've been able to enforce programs into children year upon year, and the many, many layers of that. And I just wanted to encourage everyone, because I know it can be quite triggering at times, memories that Nellie's discussing that maybe relate to your own story. It's a great time to just slow down, take a break. I always recommend grabbing some paper out, journaling about the feelings that are coming up as well. And, Nellie's bravely going through sometimes up to 20 or 30 different scenes or different memories in each session. And, it might be good for you to do, 5 or 6 in one session, or, break it in half and just really pay attention to your body. I think there's so much we can learn by, society kind of teaches us to run away from our triggers, or as soon as we feel something coming up, oh no, block that out. Let's take a painkiller or numb it. But, your triggers, or when you start feeling something happening, are real keys to unlocking, your own potential and unlocking and freeing yourself. So, if you feel something coming up as you're listening to something that Nellie is saying, I always say, take it as an opportunity to find out a little bit more about yourself, and you can make it a really positive experience. And there's so much healing that comes through each and every memory that we process as survivors, but we really need to take that time to, to sit with it, to integrate it, to move through. There's often so much denial because it can be so shocking, like, as if this happened, how could these people do it to me, etc. So, take your time, go slow with it if you need to, take breaks. I love getting out in nature, or just getting outside, going for a walk, between different things that I'm watching, etc. So it's really important to stay balanced. And I know, Nellie, you spoke about that beautifully last week, just some of the healing and daily rituals that you incorporate into your routine to stay balanced and, enable you to keep speaking out and also keep healing, because there's so much opportunities for us as survivors to now share our voices, share our truths. But, we need to stay grounded. We need to stay in our truth and stay strong as well. So I know, Nellie, you were going to speak a little bit more about some of the practices that you've been using to stay balanced as well.
Yeah, so lately I've been doing a new kind of, I guess they call them hacks these days. So I've been putting, because I don't sleep well at all, I've always been drugged to sleep, drugged to awake. I have night terrors. Things get kind of hard around when I do these interviews. Sometimes I've come to an interview with no sleep through the whole night. Just lying in bed, trying so hard to sleep, thinking about sleeping nonstop, but still awake at 5 a.m.
That's the worst.
Worst. And rocking up to an interview this morning. But I started putting a couple of times now physio cream all over, head to toe, body, like neck down, to all my ailments and stuff, like, because they went at me with hammers and nails, even nails in my head. Yeah, run over by a car, karate chops, all sorts of things through my life that gives my limbs a lot of pain. So I've found that the physio cream all over gives you a bit of a freak out to start with, but and you have the best sleep in the end. Really works. So that's just one thing that I've been doing lately, a few times, and you're just having the best sleep.
That's awesome. What a beautiful way to support your body. And, you think, after all these years of trauma and abuse, there's so much, pain that's been locked into ourselves as well. Like, what a beautiful way to honor your body and just like release that every night. And getting a good night's sleep is so important, just to remain positive and be functional and keep a good mindset. So that's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, and I just wanted survivors to know also that, and I do apologize, I do get words mixed up sometimes from lack of sleep, and because so many memories come at me all the time, often constantly in flashback mode through my day. It's getting a little bit better now because I got a lot of triggers out of my house, objects, things that would bring me back to times that I don't want to remember. So I had a lot of clearing out. So one of my mottos is transformation, not trigger. So if anything was triggering me, an object or something where the handlers were there and I was sent out to get things that they chose, I just got rid of them, donated them to Vinnie's, Lifeline, or would paint them to transform them into a new memories that I could create with things around me. And that really helped. It helped to minimize as well, declutter. That really helped. Yeah, and I just wanted to say to the viewers that just keep supporting the new survivors, because there is a lot of confusion. Often when survivors, the memories are quite new, more memories are coming in. Also at events, I used to be spun around. There was a lot of confusion, which way I was going. You have to work through all that, all these little things that they do to us to confuse us. It takes time. And I just wanted to say to the viewer, just be really accepting and encouraging of new survivors, because there's just so many compartments to go through. Not every compartment is open. And that's where the confusion can come from. You get flashbacks and fragments of memories, and it takes a long time to sequence them. Sequencing memories is the hardest. You have to do a lot of work with that, and there's also we're not believed often, which makes it worse. No, not only do we go through what we go through, but almost just as bad as the societal disbelief, and this adds further stress. And stress, like our bodies feel the stress, it comes out in our bodies. I remember when I was about 6 years old, they drew attention that on either side of my face, I have massive cysts in there. And that was from all the drugging. Couldn't come out of my body fast enough. So my body made little cysts that would sometimes get quite huge, be very painful as a collection site for a lot of the drugging that wasn't able to exit my system fast enough. It had to go somewhere. And that's another sign for children. They'll have these cysts quite often, or things like that. Another sign was that my left side of my face dropped from the huge electric shocks very early on. So left side would be asymmetrical to my right. It still is to a certain degree, but after huge shocks when I was very young, they would draw attention to the fact that, my face was dropped on one side.
Wow, almost like a stroke.
It's like, it is a mini stroke. Definitely, it's a mini stroke, and I had many of them through my life. So that's another sign. Another thing, when I'm going out into the community now, I have what I term drivers. They keep me safe. In the beginning, I had a lot of stalkings, till quite recently, till last October was the last one I saw, who opened a huge suicidal altar that I had to work very, very hard to get through. It took a long time. Even to when I first started these interviews, I was a very unwell person physically. I had been drinking a lot as a coping mechanism, and there's a lot of shame in that. And I managed to let that go. It was very hard. So now I'm free of that. But we do, it's no shame. Survivors, when we've seen what we've seen, there's not much out there for us to cope with. So that was one thing. And I was also programmed to have that as well. They did a lot of what they termed pre-programming on me as well. So they would program me and leave me with the alcohol since about 2018, and it stepped up to I was drinking maybe a bottle a night sometimes. And that had a vicious cycle because I'd get very depressed, I'd cry a lot. Things about my past would come out in social situations, which further alienated me from certain people that were so sick of hearing it. They just couldn't cope. So that kind of happened. But I have very trusted drivers now, have to make sure they're not infiltrated, which can happen anytime, and did happen up till October, November last year. So you have to be careful with that, who you have around you. It's hard to know who to trust. A lot of my memories come out when I'm being driven around as well, because I've been driven around with handlers to events so many times. So I have to have drivers that are quite chatty, will bring me out of flashbacks if I'm having them in the car. A lot of my flashbacks come in the shower, because often the handlers would be showering me for much of my life. Yeah, around the home, even walking into the kitchen, I'll forget everything, like still, because I've been programmed to forget every 3 seconds plus most of my life. I still, that overflows into the now. I can still walk many times into the kitchen and it'll be gone what I was going to be doing. I can be opening the fridge, looking at the fridge, staring in there thinking, what do I need? And that is kind of like a permanent disability. I can be out with drivers and we've just had a conversation about where we're about to go. 3 seconds later, I've totally forgotten. And I've pulled up somewhere and I'm like, why are we here? Oh, we were just talking about that. They're very good. We're just talking about you needed this from this shop. Because I'm looking at a whole lot of shops going, I don't even know what I'm about to do. And that's a daily thing. It's very hard. So you go through those phases quite often. Public spaces also, I can get very anxious. That's starting to get a little bit better. I often couldn't leave the house without a Valium. Now I can sometimes, which is amazing. And you can get a lot of anxiety in public spaces because I was taken so many times in my life to public spaces, even to school back then in the day. I would be terrified of friends, people, always thinking that everyone was about to hurt me because that was my normal.
Yeah.
And people were programmed also to say nasty things or be violent sometimes. Not their fault, but they were programmed to do that to me and to other people like me. So there was always that fear of what's next, what's going to happen. And there was always something going to happen whenever I was woken up into this. Wow. So yeah, I recently stopped drinking, but before that, up to quite recently, I was even going out with counsellors on the pretext of walking in nature. And I was so bad, I was even sourcing trees, not for weaving, but for somewhere to go because I wanted to leave this world. I just given up hope that anything could happen. So, and that was too early this year. So I really have to thank you for this platform. Now I have some hope that someone out there will, and just to have our stories listened to, you know. I was sourcing trees because I didn't want anybody to find me, and especially a child. I would never do that to a child. So I was trying to find the most out there place where no one would find me. And I was in a really bad place.
Well, look at what you've done. Look at how you've turned it around. You should be so proud of yourself for, for organizing yourself to speak out, for the healing that you are going through every day, and for all these new positive changes that you're making in your life. It's just amazing, Nellie. So you saved yourself. You're doing incredible, and you're inspiring so many other survivors to be able to move forward with their own healing journey as well. And I think that we can never change what's happened, and it should never have happened. It's awful, but we can write a new story forward where we're supporting each other, where we're creating solutions, where we're sharing our stories. So really change the silencing and the abuse that we've went through into something good, some goodness for the world as well. And you're a beautiful example of that, Nellie.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to survivors, there's healing and hope. And I look at even somebody close to me, even gave me a beautiful Mother's Day card yesterday, because Mother's Days are very, very hard for us. There's so much that I'll get to later. And I woke up to that, and flowers, which doesn't happen often, if at all. And that was beautiful. So there's healing and hope for survivors, especially when, as you've given us a platform to speak out, now I'm able to do other things in my life with purpose and find my place in the community, when I've always been isolated from that, from a very early age. And then especially through the whole prostitution, because that was a part of when they will actually use that as a cover, which I'll get to later on. So today I'm going to be concentrating mainly on the age 15, where they really stepped up the drugging, the potency of it. They brought in more LSD. My eyes were very crazed. A lot of the time, my face was very swollen, age 15, which was different from 14, where they gave me my year at the top, they said. So more friends and all that. I still had a few friends age 15 that were programmed to be my friends. And they were programmed to get me more out into nightclubs and things like that I'll get to. And I remember feeling very foggy at age 15. And I'll also go back to the end of 14. Some more things happened then leading into 15 that were set up, or everything was set up. So I had a different front personality. Age 15, I was just a mess. They really stepped it up end of 14, a lot more violence, choking, being choked on a bed and head bashed into the bed as a control. Things like that were starting to be done to me again, whereas they stepped off that a little bit age 14. So 15, I know that my eyes were downcast a lot. I couldn't look at people. I had huge fear. I had a lot of paranoia too from the overlap of the LSD that they were using on me. Gave me a lot of paranoia. I also used to, because they were bringing in a lot more, they really stepped up the electric shocks. I was doing more of the, and this is another sign that people can look at for children especially, and adults, is I would really tense my arms for a few seconds and let go. It was involuntary. I'd tense again, let go. In class, my neck always felt like it was broken. My legs were tense and let go. Like you couldn't control it. It was awful, and I'd try to hide it because I was always told you have to present as normal. You have to hide all this stuff. So that was happening. So before, at the end of age 14, I was at that Antioch Christian kind of group that was run by Stephen, who became Simon, my handler. I was still involved with that. I would come along to school or that night session with the Antioch, and my friends would have to get me up to speed with things that were happening. I used to always think, why do they know what's TV programs to watch, things to go to? Why don't I know any of this? And then it would just go, because they were always used to keep me up to speed. There was another first 15 rugby boy that asked me out at these Antioch sessions. He was programmed to come along to the school dance at the end, the senior dance, when I was 14, which was for 15 and 16-year-olds mainly, but in 17, but some 14-year-olds could be asked. So he asked me out. I didn't even know who he was. And my best friend at the time was there to tell me, oh, he's the captain of the first 15. And I had no idea. So that's the extent of me going to school and in my own world, not knowing anything, unless my friends got me up to speed with that. So my mother decided to take me along to a place called Miro's. They brought in a lot of the Dada art, nonsensical stuff as well, and the surrealism. later into my life, they got me buying those books because it was all about the nonsensical and the cryptics as well, connotations with things. So this place was called, aptly named, Miro, after Jean Miro, the artist in the 30s, 40s, around that time, when they were like 38 or whatever. They were collecting up a lot of the artists, calling them degenerates. A lot of them went into the Holocaust. So it all came from that. So my mother took me into this place called Miro's, and I didn't want red. She was insisting that my dress be red. She was programmed. So I had to have a red dress to wear to this senior formal, age 14. And got to the point where I said, well, why don't you just buy the dress for yourself then, since you want it so much? And I was so exasperated. I wanted just black, because I was programmed by then to start getting into black, because I'd taken every color off me. And I definitely didn't like red or blue or yellow. And so eventually I said to the person I wanted black, and my mother went back later and made sure that it was red. So this red dress arrived for me to wear at that senior thing. That was after party, was full of handlers, all of that kind of thing happened. Around this time also, my mother pulled me into her bedroom, which hardly ever happened. And she had a big long mirror, and she started making comments about my legs. She kept saying, your legs are really good. You've got fantastic legs. And it's a double-edged sword. I remember feeling this huge anxiety, like, oh no, what does that really mean? And then I had a memory about all the paraplegic boys and quadriplegic boys that I'd been brought around, and the things that my father had been saying, we're going to turn you into that if you don't do what we say. So they were using my mother to bring these triggers in. And she'd also, her main trigger was, she would say, be nice, like that, be nice to me, only to me, all the time. And it would really trigger me a lot. I absolutely hated it when she said that. And now we know not to say that to girls and things like that, because, you know, of those, what it really means. So I remember shivering with fear when she said that, and I had no self-esteem. And I think I just said something like, oh yeah, they're all right, I guess, whatever, and exited her room and felt just really sick inside, and yeah, just no self-esteem. And I know also when I was very young, my father and the organisation would give me different names a lot. Like one of my very young alters was a boy named Eddie, and this is a very similar name to my nana, who he was trying to make me into, but they would do the reversal of, yeah, so I'm female being called a boy's name, creating a boy's altar, and that was like the running boy. So my alter Eddie would run away from many situations when they were chasing me, and the handlers were putting me out when I was 3-4 years old to be chased and menaced by them, to know that I could never escape, that they would always congregate around me wherever I went. Another one was Juju, which was a little witch altar. So they were constantly bringing in witch altars and things like that for me, and just naming you different names so that you get used to different names. And that's one thing with the whole prostitution being put into brothels, and also Hollywood actresses and actors, is you're becoming a different person all the time. So it becomes very easy for you to bring that into more of a front altar thing, having different personalities and things like that. It's kind of like a training as well for people. That's why one reason why they place a lot of us beta slaves into brothels. Well, mine was more than that. It was to become a Delta witness and have a cover where I would be very isolated. I wouldn't want to go out into public. I would feel yeah, I couldn't get out of it. I was being choked all the time, followed all the time, forced into it, but I'll get to that later. They really stepped up the drugging from here. And with the Hollywood actresses, you can spot them a mile away.
Okay. Now we know the signs, right? It's so easy to see that kind of glassy eye, just not all there, just away all the time. And it's interesting what you're saying about just the different altars being set up so young as well. I imagine that would make it a lot easier for the handlers to just mold your personality into like whatever task that they were going to give you, because there were so many different parts that were programmed that could be brought forward for those things as well.
And you'd be moved so many times from one brothel to another, always given different clothes to wear or sent out to buy them with handlers in the shops. So everything's chosen, different personalities, different way of doing your makeup. From age 15 also, they started to train me to put a lot of makeup on to hide the red lines around the broken veins around the face, the chin, the darkness under the eyes. So they would do that to you, and then you would be having to train to cover up what they were doing to you. So they started you into looking at a lot of like singers, like my one was Susie and the Banshees. And they laughed about that too, because I was what they termed the Jew and Susie Sue. And that was my first name that they programmed me to have, was Susie, spelt with the Siouxsie, in my first place that I was forced into, the massage parlor, which I'll get to later. But she even did things like wore a swastika on her arm at some stage. Not that I knew that back then, but I found that out later. So they had lots of fun with that, the Jew emulating Susie Sue with the swastika. Even I was programmed when I was about 15 to go and buy a Star of David necklace, and a handler had a elderly lady, Jewish, and she came up to me and she spat in my face. Yeah. So they would do things like that to me all the time. Then I would feel terrible about, yeah.
Just constant confusion, isn't there? It's like they're just destroying your identity in so many ways.
It was constant. Everything was set up. Everything was kind of designed. So they not only designed their kills, but they designed me from scratch, others from scratch, interpersonalities with their own way of dressing us. We had different ways of dressing for identity that they chose, and they would change that all the time. So you'd go from one to another within months, year. So many. I've had so many I've lost count. I wouldn't even try to count, because you don't count these things, because you need to keep your sanity. Yeah. So I remember from age 6 or 7, my father used to say, he'd look at me very seriously to start with, and he would come into my bedroom and he would say, "Don't believe everything that's written in the newspapers." And then he'd laugh. He'd look very gloating and he'd laugh, because they were controlling the news. They were setting up their kills and their murders and watching or programming people to report it a different way to the general public that was different from what actually happened. Yeah. So that was all being done like quite early on in my life, that kind of programming, which I didn't really understand at that time at all. It would take me a while to start understanding that through further programming that they gave me. And also at 3.5, they used to say, my father used to say, "You were reading the newspaper. We had you reading the newspaper at 3.5. Well, that was the death columns. So I was taken to so many murders by then. They were getting me to read the death columns, videoing it, and having a big laugh about it when they would play these videos to further and further generations, that they not only had programmed me to read newspapers, but the death columns of out loud of ones that I'd been taken to even back then.
Gosh, it's just
So
horrific.
it's just like the twists and turns that they created is just so psychopathic.
Yeah. Just to
It's
be treating that death column like a trophy. Oh, just horrific.
yeah,
Monsters.
yeah. So that's just one inkling of the twist that they will bring into these organizations, or this particular organization. So they've created me from scratch, but now I'm my own person. Like I
Sure.
feel pretty much free from it, although I
Yeah.
do have anxiety that they can appear in my life at any time. I always have to keep a watch on my food and drink, create everything that I'm eating from scratch, wash everything before I cook it. It's a huge job. Come into the house, I have to do a full exit entry sweep every time I come into my house, make sure no one's here when I've got somebody with me to make sure. But that's getting less and less now. I'm pretty much feeling that they're leaving me alone at the moment, which is a good thing. It's new. Yeah, it's a good feeling. So I've had to weed out a lot of people in my life that were set up to be around me. Some of them still will phone me sometimes and tell me about another murder that's happened, and I'm just letting that just no, that's their job that they're being
Programs
given
for.
to contact me with that, but I just let those phone calls go now. I try not to answer as much because I don't need that.
Course, yeah. And it's such a big part of our healing is just creating those boundaries and releasing the relationships, that we've had for a lifetime, but that are no longer fitting with your new mental freedom. You don't
Yeah.
need to be pulled back into, that life where other people are still programmed and unfortunately being used for their agendas. So well done. It's hard as a survivor to put those boundaries around yourself, but I think it's just amazing how quickly your growth and your health and your healing can move forward once you have solid boundaries and you're holding that space for yourself. So it's beautiful, Nellie.
It is hard, but I'm amazed at how quickly one can do that. Once you learn to create your own boundaries, because we're born boundaryless.
Yeah.
We have so much done to our bodies. We lose touch with ourselves. There's a lot of healing that has to be done with that, with the grounding work. It can be very, very difficult when your head is so split from your body for most of your life to actually come and feel like you're part of a coherent whole, basically. But once that happens, it's quite swift with reclaiming what do you want to choose to do in your life and who you want to have around you. All those choices, what you want to eat. It's hard at first. I'm still struggling with some of that, but even my friend that gave me a Mother's Day card, she even wrote that I've come so far so quickly, which was lovely to see, to have that other people can now see that as well. Yeah.
It's so awesome. And I think, when we're in that position where, you're struggling, it's hard, we can feel like we're stuck in that darkness and that trauma forever. But look how quickly things can change once finds, the right insights to move forward. So that's amazing. I think that gives us all so much hope of what's possible.
So ending 14, I remember my father suddenly taking us all up in the car, driving to a cousin's house up near Gisborne. I've never been to the house before. It was a Christmas, so this is before I've turned 15. He's got everyone in the car, including my mother, and he's told me to get out of the car and only I'm coming with him. He took me into the house and he said, "We've got a performance for you." And out of the bedroom came some handlers with two of my cousins. They put on some of the music back then that was popular music. And I was programmed not to like popular music. I had to like the alternative kind of music, the Sex Pistols, the Buzzcocks, things with sexual connotations, aggressive kind of music. That was my music taste that they gave me age 15, 16, which I'll get to later. And they used to have fun with that when they used to torment me and torture me. And my two female cousins came out and they did a dance in front of me and my father's leering at them, sneering at me. And then they just went back into the bedroom, came out again because people would come in and out of bedrooms. They'd be programmed, come out for a little while, do something, go back in. And then they're programmed to do another thing, go back in. So this was happening constantly when I was around people that were under. And I'm just thinking, what is this? And then my father's finally said, right, that's it. Let's go. We just wanted you to see that. And I was taken back to the car. This is Christmas morning, apparently. Who even knows if it was Christmas morning? Because they would mix up dates and tell us it was some day when it wasn't, or some time when it wasn't. It was all to do with timing. There was still the zodiac then. And that still continued on. And then driven home. Around that time also, I was woken up and I remember coming into the dining room where it was set up. My mother, my father, and my three brothers were all in the dining room having a chat, who knows. And I remember falling against the wall, feeling clammy, my head was screaming, my heart was racing like a million miles an hour. And then it suddenly slowed down really fast and I just felt I was going into a faint. Everyone was staring at me, not doing anything, all under. I remember managing to hold the walls, get back to my room, and my father came in acting all nice and he said, oh, I'm going to get you a grapefruit. I remember thinking, oh, no, not a grapefruit. That's bitters, because I'm programmed to know this. So they had put me under a lot of ketamine when I was just woken up and amphetamines to be able to walk slightly, and given me what is termed bitters in ketamine that can cause a heart attack when your heart can start racing heaps. And then the grapefruit on top of that would have made me worse. I remember eating the grapefruit because he's told me to, feeling really like I'm just going to die. But then slowly, like they'd taken me to the brink, and then slowly I came out of that. It took a long time, and my father's laughing and all of that, because they were using me as a person to be experimented on. And this was a prequel to something that happened the following year, where I'll get to later, but a school teacher of my school, my father was in there in his house with his wife doing things and taking me to witness, which I'll get to later. So that was a prequel to that, and he actually died from that. So that was shown to me. Yeah.
That's the thing with all these experiments, they're really pushing it to the limits, and there's going to be times they get it wrong. And obviously these groups think life is dispensable.
Mm-hmm.
Awful.
They were very meticulous, so they wouldn't get it wrong. You're taken to the brink. Everything is measured by body weight, by what the drugging weights are. And they've done many of these experiments on people that have just gone missing and never seen again. So they will experiment, and en masse. I think I've spoken about this before. A plane will go down and then they've got 220 people to experiment on, or what they need. All sorts of things like that they were doing over the decades.
Gosh, it's just mind-blowing. You know, these experiments that have been conducted out in society, just under their cover.
Mm-hmm. Right under people's noses. Yeah, right under your nose, in plain sight. And my father around this time, many times would say the same thing, which was a trigger as well. You're my favorite daughter. And then my response triggered was, but I'm the only one. And then he would laugh, because I wasn't the only one. There were many others besides me that with other mothers that he had been going all around. At the end of 14, I was programmed to start jogging at 5 a.m. and my father would be up there. Then he would often follow me while I was jogging. My jogs were only for about 10 minutes. And I remember one particular time, this just happened a few times, I came back and my father was there to greet me at the bottom of the drive. He had something to tell me. It was still around 5 in the morning. just after, maybe 1:15, and my most tortured brother was brought down as well. And my father went into a big story about a woman who was pregnant, because they really attack pregnancies, which I'll get to later, which is their bigger plan. And people have to be ready for this. It's not something I can start talking about just yet. She was raped. So it's obviously my father. He's gloating. Her husband had just left for that morning. So they were already under weeks before this. Programmed, scopolamine, everything, and brought out into some awareness. He'd left the back door open. So of course someone had come in, raped her, and it just happened that morning. And then he's left me and my little brother at the end of the drive. And all of a sudden my little brother looked at me and said, "But the news isn't even on yet. So how does he know that if the news hasn't even begun?" Like, the news back then started maybe 6 or 7 in the morning, maybe 8. And they might not have even had that for another day or two, that news story. And I remember we just both looked at each other, and suddenly the penny dropped and we realized, oh, it's him. He did it. That's what he was trying to tell us. But that's one of the few times that my most tortured brother spoke to me, and with the realization programmed that how did he know that when the news hasn't even been on? And then my father came back a little bit later, brought us down the drive again, and brought a radio, and there was the news report. So that might have been another day we're put under, brought down again. They were always mixing up times.
Gosh,
yeah.
it would just be so shocking to have that playing out, you know, in a newspaper or on the TV when you've witnessed these kind of things.
And that would be constant through my life. I would be taken to things, and then quite often, not all the time, but quite often, days later, stood in front of the television. Television would be on. Sometimes it would be a video played that I didn't know. So it could be anything. It didn't happen to be the news at that time. It would be a recording of the news sometimes, but I wouldn't know that at that time, of the latest thing that's happened, a celebrity kill, a big name person killed, that I was taken to. And I would go, oh no, like the realization would start to happen, and then I would be put under again. So that was constant. So that was starting way back then. They started that to do to me. Gosh. Just the way that they concocted this entire life for me just begs belief. And I could have been anybody. Anybody could have been born into this. I just happened to be the one that was sparked into life and at that time and come forward, but it could have been anybody.
And although you have your memories, imagine how many children who are now adults out in our communities have been involved in these programs to, you know, a lesser or a greater degree as well. I think when everything comes out, we really understand it's just going to be mind-blowing how many families, how many children have been affected by these.
Well, that's right. And there's going to be a lot more people coming up younger than me, maybe older than me sometimes, with these memories. And I think the world has to be prepared for this, that more and more people will be starting to speak out about what I'm speaking about and more.
For sure.
And we have to look after them.
Yeah. As one voice comes forward, I think it just, you know, paves the way for other stories to start coming forward as well, because there's so many, you know, similar themes, and, you know, survivors are gaining more confidence now to heal. I think the whole healing process is really quickening because we're able to learn from each other. There's not that isolation where we're all alone. We can get that support, you know, even if it's not one-on-one contact. When you hear someone else that's had a similar experience, the healing from that is just incredible. After being isolated for a lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And also with my involuntary tensing of my my body, that would happen a lot at school. When I was taken to other events, my hips would be moving out of my control. It's the most horrific feeling. And then I would black out. So who knows what happened, but I can always remember certain things starting to happen. And sometimes they would play videos back. So they would play videos back of me, and that was so shocking to see what I was doing and what they were doing to me in these videos on a massive big screen. And I would just watch for a few seconds, and then it was so shocking, I would just faint.
And you would
go down, and I would hear the last voices I would hear is hold her, get her on the ground, get her on the floor, that kind of thing. And then I'd be woken up into more horror. They would have me under hypnotics with my handler, mainly Simon, making a noise, and I would repeat that noise. I'd be on the floor, I'd be naked, they'd be doing things to me. I'd be moving out of my control. And then they would bring that into what I'm talking about now, is into more of the everyday. So there's an overlap. You've got a lot of run-throughs under scopolamine and hypnotics and everything. And they do it so many times, repeat, and you're so exhausted, and they use the shock machines. And then you've got that overlap into less drugging, or different drugging as well, and into more of a awakened state. Still under programming, people give you triggers, you have a set response, you don't even know why you just said that often. So this is what I'm trying to explain to people. It's very hard if you haven't been in it to understand. So I'm trying to do my best to explain bit by bit how it works through what I've been shown and what I've experienced. So I'm still 14, and my father had me that year very, very busy, with the organisation as well. I was playing netball, I was playing basketball, I was playing cricket and tennis. So they brought me out a lot more. Age 14, this stopped at age 15. I was under a lot more programming again. They really stepped it up, brought out into the normal everyday, but under more drugging as well. So I felt horrendous in class, absolutely, when I was at school. I just had no clue what was going on. My friends were there set up to bring me up to speed with what was going on, and this would be used for the rest of my life, this kind of setup. Things would happen then as well where I would be programmed to go and buy a book, say for my twin brothers, our birthday or Christmas or something, and it would be like something called The Killer Jogger. He'd read it, then he'd give it to me to read, and I'd think, oh my goodness, why did I buy him this book? It was all about a rape of a woman jogging. Who would buy that for their brother? But when you're taken and a handler's showing you to buy that book, we'll stand by the book, we'll hold it, we'll put it down, we'll give you a stare, move away, because you won't go near that handler under those situations. You're like, why is he staring at me? I don't like him. He's so menacing, scared. They'd move away, and then you'd have to go up and pick up that book. Oh, that's what I need to get. I'll just get that. I'm just so tired. I need to go home. Let's just get that book. So that would all be happening as well. And then you'd feel guilty because you bought this terrible book, and all the guilt things would stay with you. So they would keep that in your everyday life constantly, the guilt from little markers that you were a bad person. And this got worse when I was 15 with things like, I'll get to soon, like shoplifting, under programming, things like that, and other markers like a rape that I went through when I was 15 as well. And then you're made to feel that it's your fault or that you're a bad person. So they would set up these little markers for you, for your everyday life. My father was constantly waking me up still, started in age 13, 14, but still to do writing. Now it was writing scripts and things. He would also say things to me like that he will never make a phone call without having a script first. So everything was scripted. So he made sure that he would come into my bedroom quite often and tell me that. when I was just doing my homework after school, because I always had to come straight home from
So
school.
interesting. It makes sense, doesn't it? Because they'd want to be using certain trigger words and phrases for the programming, but just to think that every single call and conversation is scripted.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And that also came from like what they were doing with the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski. They had trained him many, many times to write all his scripts as well. And that was done in many different sessions over a long, long period of time. All this manic ranting and raving. Some of it made sense, some of it didn't, but it was about what they were doing as well. So they brought that in.
I just think now too, Nellie, I think imagine where this technology is today. Like this is decades ago we're talking about. Where, you know, the mind control and them being able to insert thoughts and programming is at today with all of the electronics and technology, you know, available to them.
That's right, yeah. And with that Unabomber thing too, they actually had Selwyn Leaks, not the imposter, taken to some car park, I was told, where someone saw him just before a bomb went off, or was going to go off, and they did a sketch of his face. And when you look at him, because I found that sketch, it's Selwyn Leaks to a T.
Wow.
Even though he was placed there. And this is before CCTV that they started using as well. They'd run people through CCTV to be seen. But this is before that, when people only had sketches. There was no CCTV back then, well, not in many places till a little bit later. And so that was Selwyn Leaks. And it was Leaks's imposter that was involved in training Ted Kaczynski and the Unibombing things, and thumbing their nose at police, which is what they've done since the Zodiac times. We've beaten you at your game, making me on the police side, writing all the statements because I was on that side. And then I'm left with, well, who's now thumbing the nose at the police? Is it me? Because of the statements that I'm writing. Like there's always that conflicting thing that you put in. It's a double-edged sword. You're trying to do what's right, and then the police don't want to know that they've locked up, don't want people to know that they've locked up so many people, innocent people that were placed as patsies, like so many, New Zealand, Australia, all over the world, America, and training their men in massive scale things, and placing one or two people at the scene to take the rap. Like the police don't want that coming out, which is why I feel like the sandwich in the middle, because and it comes down to intent, because I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm trying to put a stop to this. Hey, you know, what can we do about this? People need to know what's going on, because people just hear the mass media. It's all programmed, same old stories, the hype.
I know you just can't look at the news or the newspapers now without thinking, like, you know, what's the agenda? What are they actually presenting to us here? It's so beyond anything that's true and complete.
Yeah. So there was that whole witness thing being brought up way, way back, where they would place someone woken up just under the stretched out scopolamine and other drugs, cocktails, so they're in a wake state, to see a person. And I can remember even being a child at age still 3. My twin brother came to get me, and he said, watch this. He picked up a brick. I don't even know how we picked up bricks, because we were given performance enhancing drugs to have a little bit more strength. And he threw it at a whole set up panes of glass and smash. And then he said, now you do it. And then I looked and thought, we'll get in trouble. And my twin brothers told me again, no, you need to do it now, or something like that, telling me to do it. I knew I had to. I went smash. We had a little laugh. And then I saw my father through the window. He's brought men down to watch this. Men from his school or friends of his, plus handlers that he was training. to see this is how you can bring men down, to see this happen. And we've done it again in front of them, had a little giggle because we're only 3. So this is how the programming, the witness and programming other future generation handlers to see that this is how you do it. And they were practicing it on us 3-year-olds. 3-year-olds. And I still remember that vividly. And my father's laughing, you know, see what I can do, see what I can do. Because we were programmed to do it.
Just to already have that much control, do you know what I mean, of a 3-year-old's mind, to be able to have programming, and him obviously to be showing it off to his men, it's just mind-blowing.
And he'd say things to me around this age, I'm going to do this not only to you, but to your children, to your children's children, to your children's children's children, on and on, which made me at age 4 just horrified. And that was also a micro to the macro metaphor, because everything's cryptic. So they were going to be doing this to the children of the world eventually. That's one of their end game plans with their knowledge and things like that, which is horrifying.
Yeah, that ongoing attack on the family and children, of the mother-child bond, it just is in every single piece of the programming, isn't it? Like you said, from the individual to going out to how they're controlling the masses just by weakening our society through breaking down families. It's the same plan.
Horrendous. Yeah. So back to 15 now. I remember the boy that I was programmed to go out with to the end of year dance. It was a fairly okay night. There was only, when I was leaving, there was another handler out the gate that got him to come back and give me a kiss, which was unexpected. It was awful. And so we were going out, and what they did then at school, this is the shaming that they can do, is they got friends of mine to take me to a party in another close by town. All the handlers, or many handlers, were there, the younger generation, a little bit older than me, pouring the drinks, mingling in with the school children. And this is something that they do quite often. They'll be in adolescent parties, handing out drugs, handing out alcohol that's drugged. I remember going crazy that night. A whole bunch of us went and did things to people's, knocked over people's letterboxes and things like that, because they'd given us a lot of amphetamines unbeknownst to us in our drink. And then one of the boys was then programmed to start coming to my bedroom window at night and knock on my window, which made me look promiscuous to people. People found out, and this turned a lot more of my peers against me age 15. So these are the kind of setups that they'll do to you. So I remember I became very more inward, kept my head down, did a lot more study, which they wanted me to feel that I was doing a lot of study, to make me believe that I'd got those excellent grades at the end of the year, through a lot of study, which was programming. They wanted me to get excellent grades so that they could get me out of the family home and into a university at age 16, which they did eventually, to then get me into the brothels and take me to worldwide events, which was quite horrific ones on another scale. So all these kind of things were being set up, the promiscuous kind of parties and that kind of thing, where people would turn, my peers would be turned against me to make me even more isolated, because they like to isolate you. And that's one thing about placing a beta slave into a brothel. You're isolated from the world, which is a horrific existence. So not only are you taken to horrific things, you're constantly drugged and choked and had violent things done to you while you're just woken up to be a prostitute. It's absolutely horrific what they can do. And I even saw them doing it to 13-year-olds, where they would get the mother on heroin. She had a choice, either take heroin, daughter taken off her basically to be a prostitute at 13. That's the youngest one I met there. And she had a choice of either go to jail or murder the child, or this is going to be the setup. And then the heroin becomes a way of coping with that. You just don't want to wake up. So these kind of things were being set up as well. So then I remember my father came in one day, and I'd been programmed to write a lot of writing, scripts, stories for school English assignments, things that were bizarre too, from the LSD as well. And sometimes he would yell at me, he'd read them, and even though I was programmed to write them, then I would be told off for it, yelled at, spat at, all that kind of thing. So that's a Nazi thing as well. You know, you're made to do something and then you're punished for it. And he said one time, all this is going to come back and hit you so hard. It's like the poison pen. You've got to watch what you write down because it can really come back and hit you hard. So it was like setting me up for all of that. He'd say things later like, the whole world is going to hate you, all that kind of thing, to make you have that horrendous anxiety, which they do to a lot of people. Will publicly shame them. It'll be worldwide news, that kind of thing.
And they love to do that, don't they? To take someone and just make people hate them.
Mm-hmm. And he'd say little phrases all the time, like divide and conquer. He's a goner, or she's a goner, or you're a goner, in a sinister voice, you know, always adding more and more anxiety and just horrendous feelings. And then on the other side, you'd be rewarded. For instance, I was allowed to get I just went and got my nose pierced with a small diamond. So that's a reward. You're allowed out to do this. The programming, the thoughts in your mind that that's what you want to do. Yeah, so I had a little diamond nose piercing. I think day 3 it went down the plug hole. So yeah.
You'll last.
You're given these sort of rewards every so often, and it's often jewelry. It can be amethyst jewelry, diamonds, emerald, things like that.
And there's a lot of the crystals
on the level of what you've endured or what you've witnessed or what you've got hidden under programming.
And the crystals
give you a reward system.
Programming too as triggers, aren't they? Like the actual names of the crystals are triggers. So
yeah,
interesting that the rewards tie into probably the deeper layers of the programming as well. And then you're wearing it, you're looking at it, it's in your room. Constant reminder.
I think I was allowed to get my ears pierced, quite old, not for a long time when other people had them earlier. I think I was 12. I was allowed to have ears pierced, and that was another reward for something that horrific that I'd witnessed. And you shake, you have an overlap where you shake for a long, long time after you've witnessed a baby being murdered, or an adult or an adolescent or something like that, or a rape.
Yeah, especially with the
overlap into your life, and you can't quite reach it because of the programming and the levels that they hide quite deep, and the different altars and the compartments that they leave things in, and the shocks. So at that time I was very interested in Susie and the Banshees. I remember going, lured by my twin brother, down to the record store. First person I'd see in there was one of the handlers, flipping very fast through the records, looking at me every so often in a menacing way. I'd be alerted to that because of the looks. And then eventually he'd step away, giving me another look, and I'd go over and see the record that was open in the pile. And I would go and buy that record. I'd be listening to Susie and the Banshees lyrics, and it would be things like Sell Your Daughter, Poppy Fields, things like that I'd be singing along to. And I'd be thinking, why am I singing those lyrics? this doesn't, and I'd have an anxious feeling, you know, sell your daughter, which is what my father was.
Sure.
Sometimes very nice to me at times because he knew that that was coming up. He couldn't wait. So he'd have like a gloating way around me sometimes, not just a leer or a sneer. Sometimes he'd hoik before he'd come into my room. I'd hear a clearing, like a phlegm in the throat, like, and he'd spit or something, like that was me. And then I'd hear him coming in. I thought I had a lot of ESP then, so I would, before I even thought I'd heard him, I would hide under my bed and I'd wait a few seconds, and then, because he used to do this thing where he'd fling open my door, which would startle me, and he'd just stand there leering or sneering at me or yelling at me. I hadn't done anything, and then he'd slam my door, always keeping me on edge. And I became quite fearful. So I would hide under the bed. I'd have a sudden flash because I'd just be woken up after doing things for a while. He'd be in and out. Then you'd be woken up with that all wiped, but you'd feel something's about to happen. So I'd dive under the bed, and in he'd come. He'd look around the room, and then he'd go out. But he would know I was there. It was all part of the programming. Playing these games all the time.
And your body and your mind are just in the fear of what's coming next, whether it happens or not. Do you know what I mean? And isn't it interesting how the music was used as like another layer of your programming? Because we know that all of these, you know, big groups, they're all MK slaves as well. So that they control the lyrics.
They control the lyrics.
Lyrics are written for them by programmers, and then it goes out in society. So it affects everyone. But look how it's used with, you know, a child within a generational family for that higher level of programming too. It's so interesting to see how it all interconnects.
And the music becomes part of your personality too. Like, I remember I was programmed to even do my makeup like Susie Sue, with the black outline cheeks, purple in the shadow. I was forced to shoplift the makeup products, which I'll get to later. The black eyeliner, the very black eyes, the black hair, eventually shaved at the back, which was like a Holocaust thing. So I had my hair shaved at the back. They were really going with the whole Jew thing. For my name was Julia back then, named on purpose. So that was always part of your personality, the way I dress, with the black fishnets on my arms, through my fingers. And then around that time, Madonna was on the scene. A lot of people I knew were into Madonna. That was definitely not my cup of tea. I didn't like that kind of commercial music or the girly way of dressing. I was more pure punk then. I was getting into some aggressive, even though I was very docile inside, because of the drugging, I would be programmed to be dressing in this very dark kind of way. Yeah, with the black hair, yeah, always straight over the eye was happening, which they do to a lot of people like me. They all have people with that, and that was future generations that I saw as well. They were programming younger children to do that as well. So that was stepped through the ages. Yeah. So at age 15, I was doing a subject more than everybody else. I was forced to do 6 subjects as a cover for being very busy. And one of them was history, which I used to feel ill doing because it was all about the Nazis and World War II, with a focus on the Nazis at our school. How, you know, that's what they did. I'd fall asleep a lot in class because of all the drugging. Teachers just seemed, because teachers were also under, they just seemed to let it go with me. I just put my head in my, I often didn't even go.
Tired.
I was just exhausted beyond anything from the constant violence and in my programming, the pain, the exhaustion from being woken up through nights that you think you're sleeping, but you're not. And then the constant amphetamines pumped through your system to make a presentation at school, all that kind of stuff. was being done. I just felt ill all the
It's
time.
amazing you made it through school. To think that children are so resilient to be able to do school at all, considering everything that was going on, it's just incredible.
But they would put amphetamines and things through our system to, you know, I always had noise in my head. It was my normal. I never questioned it. Eventually, ears were always erupting into explosions. I wasn't ever allowed to go to a doctor at first. Once I went to a doctor when I was about 16. Of course, a handler was there. I was given antibiotics for the first time. But they would give me antibiotics eventually when I was under. So in my like tubes down my nose, with concoctions, they were still getting things into my system when things would go so far. But I was being taken to things like submarines, like I would be in a bottom of a ship, taken out through the, not the hull, whatever it is that's got a bit of water in it, in a wetsuit with my handler. And this was a skill I didn't even know I had. So these are altered state skills that I'm programmed to have. And I would be taken out of the ship through the water into the way down underwater, like a big ship, way down. No mask on for breathing, nothing. My handler would have a mask on. It was Sel's nephew some of the times. He wasn't Sel's nephew, it was a made-up name. He was quite vicious, but these times he would be encouraging me. Yes, you can do it. Because at first I'd say, I can't do this. Yes, you can do it. You've done it many times. Right underwater with flippers on. So all I had was flippers into a submarine way under the water. And that would be one of the ways they would be taking me into different countries for events.
Wow.
So I would be swimming. He would have a mask on and he would say to me, I'll give you my mask. I can always give you my mask, but you can do this. Yeah. And I would be able to hold my breath for a long time, even though I can't even swim, hardly can swim. In my front halters, I can't swim.
That program is.
And I never put my ears underwater. And then I would at times have excruciating pain in my ears because they were so damaged through the coat hangers and the needles that they were putting through my ears when I was younger and when I was 12 and other times. So my ears would be exploding, especially when I was 15 and from the pressure and the damage. So I was in a lot of pain going to school and just had to put up with it. And my ear would just be the noise. They make you handle a lot of pain in certain times where they then put you out to it, and then also in your day-to-day life when they bring you out into the day-to-day, you have to handle a lot of pain to become quite strong.
Your endurance is tested, both physical, mental, and your pain threshold to be able to handle this kind of pain. And I think, you know, survivors tend to have that very high pain threshold or even experience a lot of body numbness because they've almost had to shut down parts of their body because they were abused so badly. And, you know, through healing, we've finally got that sensation of coming back into our bodies and having good feelings in your body rather than the abuse that you've went through. And just incredible what you were saying about the trafficking underwater. I've spoken to a few survivors that have went through a lot of underwater programming and experienced the same thing where, you know, they were programmed in their alters to basically be able to breathe underwater. Like they didn't need the masks, the tanks that other people did. And it just goes to show that power of the mind and what they're able to do through this kind of level of programming as well. And then there's
do or die often.
What was that?
It's do or die.
That's
they
right.
Put you in situations where you have to do it or you'll die. Yeah. And they train you more and more to do it. So that it becomes very natural. But you don't even know you can do it.
Until you get into that position.
Like I'd always be a klutz in the water because I was always programmed to can't put my ears underwater, and I couldn't anyway. And sometimes when the handlers were showering me, they would actually shoot a jet into my ear as well. I would have horrific pain right up into my 40s, and it was unexplained. Wouldn't know what had caused it. Doctors wouldn't know either. So yeah, I became very withdrawn again. I knew that my parents hated me, and yet it was quite weird because they would have people over, and my mother and father sometimes would start ranting, oh, she's a wonderful, wonderful daughter. And I'm just looking, what?
Where did that come from?
These people hate me. And now so it was all for show.
That would have hurt as well.
Not that it mattered, because these people, most people, if not all, that came over were always under or would be put under pretty soon. So yeah, it was for me to believe that this was a real world when it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
World was far from real, but I had no idea that I was being drugged like I was. I had no idea I was being shocked. All the pain that I felt, I thought it was just me. Pain in my head. It was my normal.
Oh, you knew.
This is what survivors go through. We just think that this is our normal because we haven't known anything else. You have to put up with the pain. You have to get through it. So my father stepped up the whole, you're a filthy whore. You belong in a brothel. You come into my bed many times, knee on the bed, leering over me, doing more things with my lips, calling me ugly. Ugly, I belong in a brothel. So that really stepped up when I was 15 and 16.
How awful.
He'd also sneer at me, and he'd say, you're nothing but a thing. So he was objectifying me. You're nothing but a thing. All the time. I remember one particular night, he woke me up and he had a devil's mask on, and they had put LSD through my system. So his voice sounded really guttural, and I'm paralyzed. You can't move your arms. I'm angled this way so I could see the red eyes from the mask that he had on, making me believe it was the devil. It just looked horrendous. It must have been a very good mask. He's morphing into himself, and then the mask on and himself. And he's telling me that he's ripping into my soul. He's saying, I've got you now. I've got you now. I've got you now. Everything repeated 3 times. You belong to us. Taking your soul. And I could actually feel, because of the LSD, I could feel when he was ripping into my lower stomach area, that he really was taking something out of me. It was horrendous. Like, I was just paralyzed. There was screaming in my head from the drugs. The red eyes were beaming at me. It was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And it went on for a long time. And then all of a sudden, I must have passed out and woken up again, not knowing nothing was there. It was almost like everything just disappeared. I lay there for a while. My bed at that stage, he had dragged into the middle of the room. So the walls are coming in on me. The drugs are slowly coming out of me. I remember going into my mum's room, which was a no-no, like I never was allowed in there. And she has turned on me and said, oh, what is it you've been doing? Must have been you. You've been doing something. And she was implying seances, which I'll get to later on as well. They set me up with one that was horrendous, to do with the school teacher around the corner that my father murdered. So that was being done as well. So then it was put on me that it was, oh, it must be something you've been doing to make me into a bad person. And this was another marker that I was able to remember from time to time when they would bring this back, just to make you feel bad about it. So these kind of things were being done a lot. And it developed into kind of like about this time, I call it the concrete feeling, where I would be paralyzed, lying in bed and feeling like I was slowly being filled with concrete and couldn't move. It was just a horrendous feeling. And this would overlap into school time. I would just be sitting there, and all of a sudden that would come back at you, and you'd have to hide it. in the classroom. You'd be absolutely freaking out, and you weren't able to show it because people would. And I had the crazy eyes then anyway from the LSD, so I was always trying to hide that. I didn't know. I just thought it was me. So I was closed up. I barely spoke to people around this time. I barely spoke anyway. I didn't speak a lot unless I was programmed to say something. So I would nod a lot in conversations that friends would have, and I was programmed if they ever told me to do something or invited me somewhere, then I would have to go. So this was always set up, and survivors will know what I'm talking about. So I was basically a nervous wreck, but had to hide it. This is how I felt inside. It was an awful feeling. I began to have a huge fear that would repeat and repeat because of programming and what they were saying to me in my everyday life, especially when I was in bed. And often my father would open the window just a little bit to let air in, but that would freak me out as well. But I began to have this fear, they are coming to kill me. So this was being stepped up a little bit. They are coming to kill me. I didn't know who they were, but I just had this awful feeling that my days were numbered. My father started coming into my room and giving me a memory about the past town I'd lived in that I hadn't thought of in 4 years since I'd left. And I remember thinking, why have I never remembered that town or the people I used to know? And then it was gone. But he came in and he was saying, you know, that nun that you loved, that taught you, well, we tortured her. She started speaking out about us and we showed her she'll never speak again. And it was that time that they had shocked her and taken me in there and she'd bitten off part of her tongue, or they had said that that had happened and had a piece of something to make it look like a tongue. I don't know whether it happened or not. And then later she was brought around me. I remember saying hello to her one day when I was with a friend when I was about 16, and she looked at me in shock and horror and ran away. And I never knew why she ran away from me. I remember back then my father had made me do a sex act on her. Maybe they had put my face in front of her so that she remembered something. But I remember I was about 15 or 16 and I was in town with a friend that had pulled me into town to walk up a certain way, and there she was. And I remember she just looked at me in absolute horror and ran. And she was the only person for me when I was in primary school, the only person that showed me any care. And so that was pretty bad.
The one person that spoke out was silenced. Just awful.
Yeah. So my father was saying she'll never be any trouble to us anymore after what we did to her and things like that. And he said that also about the doctor with my friend whose father was a doctor that had tried to help me under programming to show me that no one would ever be able to get me out. My father also said when I was 15 and he came into my room that he had tortured the doctor and his family and the daughters so much and run them out of town. And I remember thinking, why have I not thought about any of these people for so many years? And then it was just gone again. So it was just like they would bring back fleeting memories into my life, and then they would go. And I remember a new girl came to school suddenly, and I remember just a fleeting thought, oh, this is a setup. And of course, she stood there and befriended me. And then that thought was gone. And then she would be programmed to come to my house and walk me into town with her. And then on the way, like I'm drugged in increments of coming out, she's starting to talk about shoplifting. I remember thinking, oh no, how do I get out of this? She's going to be shoplifting. I don't want to do it. Oh no. More things are coming through my system, like MDMA, whatever they were using, starting to relax. At first I'd think, we'll just get through it. And then you're enjoying it. And it's easy because the places she was programmed to take me to, like the big chain store, I think one of them was called Farmers, that everyone in the store was under, and there was handlers there. So it was very easy for us to shoplift. I was getting all my makeup that I was programmed to put on my face to cover the redness and the signs, different colors, everything chosen for me. I knew what I had to get. Things for my mother, I was programmed to shoplift things for my mother. It became enjoyable from the drugging. And that went over a few sessions until suddenly we got caught. They programmed a man to catch me. He grabbed me around my torso in the street. I was taken to the police. And of course, my father covered all that up. I didn't even have to go to court. My father had the police under, courts, and nothing ever got spoken about again.
They obviously had that control of over the police, right? So
that was easy. Yeah, back then it was a smaller town. With the open window, I remember my mother used to, I missed out on it, but my mother started reading a Peter Pan book to my younger brothers just before we left the second town that we lived in, before this third town, and making a big scene about Wendy and Peter Pan and going through the window and Neverland. And my father started to program me in more of an awake state, telling me that I would be going out the window at night, meeting up with friends, going out drinking, doing what normal adolescents do. And I remember looking at him and thinking, I'm not going to be doing that. And then the next time I'm woken up, my friends are talking about, they're all standing in a circle, you know, come over, we're planning to go out to the nightclubs. And I'd already been programmed to go to nightclubs when I was 14, to do hair shows. And I'm thinking, this is strange because I had some kind of overlap about going through my window because my father was programming me to. And I was just thinking, well, I'll just go out my window then. But it was all just a setup at that exact moment. So that's what I started to do, like go out the window as I was programmed, get dressed, hide my dress clothes underneath and a lot of them I'd shoplifted. So I had clothes for once. I normally didn't have anything. And go out the window, meet my friends, and there were places called Fez, F-E-Z, ending with Z, Z for Zodiac. Zed's was another nightclub, Z-E-D, run by German brothers, also set up by Zodiac. Everything's ended or started with a Z. They played all the music, The Cure, Susie and the Banshees, Sex Pistols, all that kind of music that I liked. So I started to do that, surrounded by handlers, sneering at me. I had a set way of dancing, quite bizarre, really. The handlers would be on the dance floor giving me menacing looks. I feel, you know, I feel strange around them. The bartenders were the handlers in these clubs as well. So they were drugging people en masse.
Yes, they'd be able to target people
set up.
Yeah.
Certain fights were set up. A lot of people dressed in the punk era with the Doc Marten boots and the punk clothes, the punk hairdos, that kind of thing that I was emulating as well under programming. So they were bringing in a lot of that sort of punk stuff. Lots of fights were set up as well. All my friends were obviously set up. And then this other girl had arrived at school that was different from my friendship group. And she dragged me out one night. And I didn't know her that well. Her mother and father were some kind of fundamentalist Christian group. That's all I kind of knew. And she dragged me out one night and said that she wanted to go and meet a boy and that she'd already met. I said, well, how do you know him? And she said, oh, I went out with him. I came out to this club 2 nights ago. And I remember thinking, clubs aren't open on a Wednesday, thinking this is strange. So she was under programming to say all this stuff to lure me to this other club that was not my kind of music, more of a commercial type club. more with like a sexual element to it, I guess. People flirting and dancing differently to what we did in the punk scene. Very uncool kind of people dating, that kind of thing that I wasn't really into. And she had this boy who was a lot older than her, maybe 25 or 28. I remember feeling tired. I just wanted to go home. I didn't like the music. And I thought, well, I'll just have one more drink. Noticed one of the handlers poured me a drink, and he said to me, enjoy your drive. And I went, what? Because she was trying to get me to go for a drive with these boys, and he had a friend. And I'm like, I don't want to, I just want to go home. And all of a sudden I'm drinking the drink and I'm feeling like, oh my goodness, I need some fresh air. I'm going, something's wrong. After I'd been given this drink by the handler bartender, I need to get outside. And she knew what to say because she was under programming. Well, we'll take you for some fresh air. We're just going to go for a 10-minute drive, get some fresh air. And I'm thinking, yeah, fresh air. I really need fresh air. I'm going to faint in front of everybody. I need to get out. And then as I'm walking out with them, the colds hit me. I started to wake up a bit, starting to feel a little bit better, getting in this car. He drove to my school, to where the netball courts were. She got out and went off with this boy into the field. I'm just sitting there going, oh no, okay, here I am. He's then dragged me into the back seat and raped me. Oh. And I was wearing the red dress that my mother had got me to buy. That was my rape dress, basically, to be raped in. So that was a setup. I remember afterwards getting a morning after pill, and I couldn't even fight him off because of the drugging in my system. I had absolutely no muscle tone, nothing, no feeling that I could even fight it off. And I've been raped many times before, but this is more in my awake state now. Yeah. And feeling stupid for having got in the car, all that kind of stuff came back. And this would be another reason to leave town eventually. So they were setting up all these reasons for me to leave town, turning my peers against me, setting up the rape, eventually to want to leave town, because they program you to want to do things eventually. You know, you want to leave as a cover for them. So these kind of things would happen. I remember I've been doing this for years, but I've picked, and I still have, like on my thumbs, all the skin used to be picked off and bloody from a very young age. So I would have this nervous habit of picking my thumbs. Little things like that you do is another sign for people if they want to, you know, help children or whatever, like these little signs that I'll probably speak more about next session. More signs that, you know, little things like my shoes were always bought too large for me, like 2 or 3 sizes larger, so that when I fell over a lot at school, it would be blamed on the shoes were bought too big because you were a poor family and you're wanting, you know, father was wanting you to grow into your shoes. And it was a cover for being electric shocked and drugged to the point that I would always have like a permanent egg on my head from falling over. I was tripping all the time. Wow. Losing balance, what they do to your ears too, which is another programming, what they're doing to my ears with the needles and the coat hangers through the eardrums was another programming as well, so that you'd look more, present as autistic. Children that can't sit down for long, squirming, for things that are done to them horrifically, blamed as on ADHD, and there's such like a huge influx, more and more of these children with all these symptoms and signs coming out.
It's so true. We just need to be so aware when we look around us of, you know, what children can actually be experiencing, and not, you know, write off, you know, these so-called behavioral problems, or, you know, someone being clumsy or someone always having a bruise or scratches or wounds on them as something that it's not.
It's not. No. Oh, and also when I was 14, I was allowed out to work at a artificial insemination place, which had connotations for what they were going to be doing later with the world. I was also told that I was conceived artificially, which came from the Mengele era, and they were studied under him and eventually killed him. Made it look like he'd gone out to sea swimming, and he was given a choice the way he was to die. Yeah, I was told that in 2011, which I'll get to later. So now I've been going out the windows even more, night clubbing, back with my friends to Fez and Zeds. Handlers are always there. They're sneering at me all the time, and I'm feeling very unsafe a lot. And when I would walk home at 3 a.m. in the morning, there'd be always the same white car with the handlers. And for some reason, I used to always feel safe walking home, because everywhere I went, the handlers went. So no random person could have ever come up to me and done anything.
You had your own bodyguards.
I had them, yeah, and they would always make me realize they were there. Fleeting moment, they would come close to me, they would yell things out. Later Simon would be amongst them. Yeah, so that would always happen. I would get very drunk back then. I would come home and vomit and wonder why my father never knew. He knew that I was going out there, and I'd be vomiting in the toilet from the alcohol and the drugs, and things like that. So that was starting to happen, and I was balancing that with the study that I was doing. So getting towards that, I remember my nana never used to speak to me very much. She was always under drugging. It was always set up before we arrived on family outings to her house, which was in another town close by. But one day I remember her telling me that my father, his first job was at the freezing works, which was the abattoir. So his job was killing animals and cutting up meat. So he was trained in that. And that is one thing that they train a lot of MK Ultra program people through the files that they got. There's no MK Ultra anymore, that was defunct. But people, for some reason, still call it MK Ultra, but it's actually just organizations that get hold of the files and use these MK Ultra files on us with the torture techniques that go way back. But so she was starting to tell me about that. And I know later on there was a Nick Cave album that came out when I was in my 30s called Abattoir Blues. So I was programmed to buy that as well. So they're always bringing things back as mementos as well.
Those themes.
Yeah, those themes, targeting people's families. Like I know Nick Cave's family's been targeted. He's lost a couple of children, and I'll get more to that later. So my nana used to do weird things, like she would run boiling hot water out of the tap, and I'd notice her washing teacups, splashing the boiling hot water over her hands, and it would take a few seconds before she'd pull them out finally, because she wasn't feeling it to start with. Because of the drugging, it has a delayed, like anesthetic has a delayed effect on you. And one of my earliest memories of witnessing this that my father wanted me to witness was my most tortured brother. My father brought him out of the hallway when I was stood to watch out of my bedroom, and he had the element on the stove, glowing orange, and he was saying to me, watch this, watch this. And my poor little tortured brother, he got him like half lifting up off his feet, put his hand straight on the element. And it took about 4 or 5 seconds before my little brother even made a reaction. And then even then he didn't scream, he didn't cry. And this is a burning bright element.
Burns are so painful. Oh.
And he would have gone through that later, because that's what they would do. They would drug you so you wouldn't feel what they're doing straight away, but then you'd be brought out into that later when no one could hear you. And this would also take his identity away from him a little bit. Like it would take fingerprints, palm lines, everything would be made anew. So not from his birth, but then later on, things like it would grow back. I remember my father saying something to my mother, who was stood to watch as well. This is done to her son. It'll grow back, his skin will grow back.
It's such a common way that they abuse people too, is making them watch the abuse of people they love. Like, that's just so traumatic. Even more traumatic than the experience yourself, to have to see someone that you love being victimized and abused in that way, and not being able to do anything about it. It's just horrific.
So it's getting up towards the time that I'm taking my, what was termed school certificate, or school C, which is when you're 15 or 16, you take an end of form 10, I think it was called, or form, grade 10 over here in Australia. It would have been form 5 in New Zealand. We have like a certificate which gets you into the next year, what you're doing. It's kind of like a prelude to that. And what my father did just before this was he took me to my nana's hometown, and he said, watch this, watch this. And there comes my nana on her bicycle, because she used to ride her bicycle to look after her mother, whose name was Nellie as well. And my mother's name was Nellie. And she's on her bicycle going to her mother's house. She'd been moved out of her home and made to live in a assisted living, which is quite old. And she used to go there and look after her, cook meals, things like that. And there's a motorbike, and I've seen the motorbike come towards her, then stop, and then come towards her, and then take her out. He ran her over, and she's in the ditch. She's flung off her bike in the ditch. And my father said to me that's what's going to happen to you if you don't do exactly what we say. He said, you've got no idea what's coming up for you. And if you don't do what we say, that's going to happen to you. Things like that. While I was sitting in the car with him, and then he's driven me away. And I saw her later. I was taken while I was studying for my exams. Oh, my father made a big thing about being so concerned that my nana's accident, this is in front of all the relatives and my mother, that my nana's accident would have an effect on the twins doing their school C, and how concerned he was about that. So that also happened. And I'm taken to intensive care to see her, and I'm told she's only 36 kilos or less, 35, 36. And later on, because my father always wanted to make me into his mother, I was taken down to, I think, 37 to 39 kilos. I was starved down to then. So there would be that sort of remembrance for my father. I remember seeing her curled up in a little cot bed in intensive care, and she was in fetal position. And I didn't even know if she was alive or dead. I didn't know what I was being taken to. And I eventually worked out, yes, she was still alive. And she just looked so frail and tiny. So later on, my mother got me to go to a Chinese restaurant for my father's birthday. This is when I was maybe 16. I've just turned, end of 15. And he's there, my brothers are there, and there's a big table of men, handlers, programmers next to us. And he's having to do his script. So he's belted his fist on the table, and he's yelled out, I hate you all, to us, the children. You're horrible, horrible, horrible children, and I wish you'd never been born.
Oh.
And the men, the handlers next to us, are just laughing. The waitress with the water has just fled the table.
I'm out of here.
She's taken off. My twin brothers burst into laughter for some reason, because I'm feeling terrified. And I'm looking at him thinking, why is he laughing? And he's come outside with me, because he's under programming to do that. And I've noticed that we're right next to the massage parlor, and I've got triggered from that, because that's where I'm being taken when I'm under. Till soon I'm going to be taken there in my awake state. And I've turned my back to it, and my twin brothers said to me something like, this is not normal. I've been to other family homes, and this doesn't happen in their family home. Parents treat their children really nicely. My twin brother was calling him Jekyll and Hyde around that time. He'd come into my room and laugh at him and poke fun at him and call him Jekyll and Hyde. He was seeing more of the Jekyll and Hyde than me. I would just mainly see the pretty violent one. My father was just openly acting like a psychopath, even in public spaces. And no one could help us. No one. He would do this in public, and yeah, no one would help. It just begs belief. And then my twin brother was often coming into my room, just out of the blue, and quick, turn on the radio. It would be a university radio that was being played then, called Radio Massey, and it was playing all the Sex Pistols and Susie and the Banshees right at that moment, because they had them under as well, to be played. So my brother, this is before cassette, we didn't have cassette tapes then much. So he'd just be turning on the radio, and there it was, the song just starting right at that moment. So this is what was set up, or the music was set up like that.
So much control, right?
Unbelievable. Yeah. So my father really just increased his hatred of me. I remember cutting deep into my thighs, and this is something that a lot of MK Ultra file children will do, is we'll start cutting ourselves under programming. I remember my father showing me how to do it, to take my aggression out on myself. I'd even be programmed to think, why didn't I think of this before? Under programming. So I would be cutting into my legs, not even feeling it, because you're under numbing concoctions, drawing lots of blood with a crucifix with a point on it, with the Jesus thing. So that was happening a lot. So I remember going to my exam, and I remember feeling quite unusual, strange. I feel very, very amped up, robotic, like I was on a mission. I had to do this. I remember walking in like a robot, feeling slight aggression. And I remember flying through the exam like there was no tomorrow, knowing all the answers, each exam, one after the other. I was like this. My father later on made reference to this following year, saying, you got 100% for maths, which I didn't. It might have been 100%, then it got scaled down. It might have been an easy exam, but they were right through the examination markings and everything. So they could give you anything they wanted in order to advance you to the next step, which was to get me into a university quite young.
Get you into the right course for their plans.
To get me away from the family home, get me further and further away in increments, further away from my peers and my friends, to be moved around into another town, another island, different island even, to then be taken to more and more things where no one knew. And I could be taken to 3 by 3 by 3 and not brought out into an awake state very much. With the brothel as a cover, always drugged there. Yeah, completely isolated from an outcast of society, basically. That was an existence that was planned for me, which I'll get to soon. I remember at the end of the year, a friend got me to go and stay with her and some other friends at a beach house in a place called Foxton Beach that I'd been taken to before and horrifically abused with lots of other children in these beach batches in my younger years. I remember feeling on the way there suddenly triggered by it, and just as soon as we arrived, we had one drink of alcohol, not even finishing the drink of alcohol in the place that we were staying, hadn't even looked around, and in walked the handlers. And then I just went blank. I don't even remember, just remember dropping on the floor, waking up the next morning, all battered and bruised, or the morning after, or however long it was. And everyone else is just getting up off the floor. And someone said, well, it must have been a really good drink. And we've laughed. foggy, can't remember much. And then my friend suggested go and see another friend of hers back in our hometown, and we did, and we walked in, and the friend is really worried. She said, we've just woken up. My mum was here last night as well, and all the doors were opened. We've woken up to everything open. We can't remember anything either. And I remember having the thought programmed, oh my goodness, my father's been here too. He's doing it to all my friends and everywhere I'm being taken. And I remember having this huge crashing crescendo of like everything was falling on me, avalanche, thinking it's me. Everywhere I go, he's doing it to everyone that comes across my path, feeling that guilt. And then it's gone maybe a minute later.
Wow.
Yeah. So all that kind of stuff was happening as well. So in and out of awareness with the drugging. Another thing that they did to me in the family home was they set up another marker to do with my mother. So she'd found my dirty footprints one day, being programmed to go down the side of the house when it was raining and muddy, and seen a dirty footprint getting back through the window. And she's come and she's brought my brothers with her under programming into my room, and she's full on slapped my face and called me a hussy and I won't say the word. And that was set up as a marker. This is a woman that the year before has encouraged me and even taken me out to have older boyfriends. Now she's had a different front altar put in, and she would always morph between the martyr of the family to the prude to a woman that was very flirty with men. They were some of her altars that was very hard to follow for me back then, because I was always put under and brought out. Couldn't have strings of memories. So this was done to me, and I remember being horrified that she had hurt me like that, because she was a very gentle woman, very docile, because she'd been given a lobotomy, given docile drugs. She was very subservient to my father. He would do horrendous things in front of her and she wouldn't react. So yeah, that was set up to be a marker that when I was programmed to leave the home, that I would never want to come back. So that was done. Another time my father sent me out into the back shed, and he said, there's something very, very significant for you to see. You'll know it when you see it. I remember looking around, and there it was. Had Otago rugby written on it, a little tin. I remember opening it, thinking didn't even know what I was doing then, because everything you can't remember. And looking into it, and there was a key pressed into what was greenish blue putty, and it was like a silver key pressed so that it was flat inside. I remember having a jolt, thinking, why? What is this? It's just a key. And I felt that there was something about it, because my father had said there's something very significant. And this is basically what my father was doing, or trying to tell me, was that I was about to be given the keys into further knowledge. Wow. And I was about to be taken into brothels in my more awake state, to be then used as a cover for many, many years, to be taken to horrendous things that I'll be bringing forward.
It's so sad how you were programmed so much for all of this behavior, like the dating older people and, being out, etc. And then it's put on you that shame and that guilt that, you were being promiscuous and your mum slapping your face. I think that's one of the hardest things for survivors to work through, is just releasing that shame and guilt and realizing that, this was programmed, this was part of their agenda of being able to use us for trafficking, to break down our identity and, make us feel that we were responsible. So, I think it's so important that we're having these conversations so survivors realize, no, this is what was done to us, and to hold space for our own healing. So thank you. I know that would be really hard to share.
That is key to it too. Like, they want you to believe that you're making the choices, because they don't want you to know that they're behind the scenes. They don't want that. So everything that's done, you're led to believe that it's you doing it. And that is key to what I'm trying to bring forward, how they break the mind early on and do all the programming to the point and make you go crazy until the point that you think that you are crazy, that you have to hide that these thoughts are yours. I never thought for in a million years that my thoughts weren't my own. Still getting used to having my own thoughts. For people that haven't been through that, that's very hard to grasp, but we know what that's like, and all we can do is try and bring this forward so that something can be done about it.
Absolutely. And just we can all recognize the signs of what it is like to be handled, because it is so predominant in society at this stage as well, with so many children and adults being affected. So thank you so much, Nellie, again, for sharing these memories so we can all further understand, the programming that goes into creating a mind control slave. And I thank you so much for, sharing so eloquently and so vulnerably, so we can just start to understand the way these tools are being used around us. And I know it's like we were saying before, it's such a big thing for us to be able to release that shame and that guilt, so we are able to hear. And I love that we can have these conversations and start getting this important understanding out, so survivors can keep healing. You don't have to hold that shame of these things that have been put on you. It's time for us to remember these were things that were done to us. We can hold that space for ourselves and for each other to heal. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabbi. Thank you.
You're welcome. And we'll chat again soon.